Imagine this: three young Americans sunning themselves on the warmth of a Mexican vacation, setting off into adventure. What started out as a fun trip turned out to be a nightmare. It was 1972. Mike Cook, May Stanley, and Paul Smith got stranded when the motor on their boat failed when they were nearing the Mexican shore. Little did they know that things were going to get much darker. They were going to be locked inside one of Mexico's most dangerous prisons. The journey starts. All it had started as an adventure summer that the three friends had set off to make. Their goal: sail up the western coast of Mexico in an old boat with a battered engine, a sure sign of their very lean budget. The boat was small and weathered but represented freedom and access route to exploration, thrill and spontaneity, and freedom from the drudgery of their daily life in California. They set sail from their city, full of hope and expectation, with a feeling of liberty. And at that time, no need for a passport crossed the borders between Mexico and the United States, as the sea was such an open highway where the sun kisses the water, and every sunset promises a whisper of adventure. But fate had other things in store. When they were near the coastal city of Mazatlán, and the engine just broke them completely. Their dreams had hit a nightmare: $300 in cash to their names, and this harsh reality stared right in the face. Under the sun, the dream had turned into a dilemma. How do they fix the boat and carry the journey ahead with funds dwindling? With desperation setting up its base, a couple of impossible thoughts started making inroads in their minds. As they brainstormed amongst themselves with little else to turn to, they needed to find ways to raise enough cash to get the boat repaired. It was Paul who first floated the idea: what if they tried to make a quick profit by buying something cheap in Mexico and selling it in the States? May and Mike expressed initial reservations, but the reality of dwindling resources forced them to change their stance. It was then that a wildly reckless plan began to take shape in their heads. Why not buy the local drug, hashish, 10 times cheaper in Mexico and sell it in America to make a profit? The more they tossed around the idea, the more this sounded like the only way out. It was risky, of course, but so profitable as anything else ever could be. They stumbled upon a taxi driver willing to sell them hashish and came up with the idea: why not buy large quantities of hashish and sell it in America? Then he forced them to take a long, empty ride in a taxi. A long, lonely ride took him further and upwards on the mountains, away from an animated and lively seaside town, into such strange, eerie lands. The road wound along then curved at every passing second, by which time their sense of discomfort grew. They did not know where they were going. A threat of probably leading themselves into some form of danger hung hauntingly over their minds. Heavy with the scent of soil and greenery, there was a group of men, including the farmer, waiting for them. The farmer packed his donkey with sacks of hashish, and for a brief instant, the three friends exchanged worried glances. They soon realized that the operation was much bigger than they had thought. They were not buying a small amount. This was the big league. The seriousness that creased the farmer's face spoke louder that there was no turning back. The three Americans left their nervousness and language barrier behind, but were still able to sell the hashish. In minutes, the trio walked back carrying 2 heavy bags of hashish. Nothing weighed more than the fear that they carried of what would happen if they were caught. As tension in descending the mountain built, rustlings in the underbrush or just a faint vehicle sound left cold bodies feeling nervous. The excitement of adventure dampened as chilling fear crept its way slowly over their bodies. But that was not the worst of it. As they backed up, a local policeman suddenly emerged from the street ahead of them. Panic was out of the question. They walked heroically past him, every step an eternity, as their hearts beat like thunder in a roar that filled their senses. They half hoped for the feel of a firm hand to grasp down on their shoulder at any moment. Miraculously, nobody stopped them. They walked back to the boat, thumping chests, as if they had narrowly escaped a bullet. These guys were pretty proud of themselves because they had 10 kilos of hashish. The scam was as simple as that: hide drugs inside a surfboard and start working their way back home, where they could sell the hashish for a handsome profit. They'd heard of others doing the same. It seemed foolproof. They hollowed the board, crammed the hashish inside it, sealed it back up, and that was how they were going home. But still, the boat had something different planned. The engine could no longer be repaired. They were again stuck. Hopes to reach California quickly were fading from view until they got to know Frank and Dan Sierra, 2 American brothers, like themselves, who wanted to go north. Brothers invited them aboard on their private vessel, and those 3 chums were happy enough to receive the invitation. Everything now finally looked all right again. What Mike, May, and Paul did not know is that these brothers had little secret of themselves and were very dangerous. Sierra brothers were themselves big smugglers, and on that vessel, literally, a ton of hashish was kept hidden. These brothers traveled to Mexico with the intention of buying it for $30,000, where they calculated tenfold chances of the deal happening back in the States. Right at that moment, the three friends were in waters well over their heads, helping smuggle a massive load of drugs across international waters. The first few days at sea were surprisingly calm. They filled hours with stories and fishing and basking in the sea's vast expanse. The brothers breathed confidence and infectious boldness to those surrounding them. Almost, it felt like for a moment as if everything might just go right after all. The brothers started imagining how they would spend the money upon selling the hashish. A new automobile and a place of their own, a dream within reach. They blundered upon a small island, wet, shivering, and absolutely exhausted. They rested on the sand after thrashing around on the beach because that was just enough to still have them alive. However, just as dawn broke on the horizon, they saw the butchery left there. The beach was all burlap sacks of hashish, in disarray with its sand. It was quite surreal, really a magnificent sunrise giving warmth over a pristine coastline, tainted by the sheer presence of hundreds of pounds of illegal drugs. They knew they had to leave fast. Frank and Mike started off toward the gathering villagers, moving to keep them occupied for the time that others hid the bags. They mumbled in broken Spanish explaining they were simply tourists whose boat sank. Meanwhile, Paul and Dan dug frantically into sand holes for hashish burying. It looked almost like they could get out of this one. But as there was a little light beginning to shine inside of them, policemen emerged, guns drawn, yelling in Spanish to Estados Unidos, "Arrodillos," there was no way back now. 5 men had been confined to some vile Mexican prison, locked inside some slum of a place, cells of a sort they had never known, but overcrowded rooms, where only the hardest survived by running down the weakest. This prison was hell, all confusion. Violence and despair was rife. Even for the standards of guards, the Mexican warders were lethargic in the best case, and dangerous at worst. There was no food, and what they had was not edible. It is a hot place with an odor very hard to bear. Days turned into weeks, and the three friends fought with the dying ember of hope. Each day was a fight to survive, where tensions burst into violence, and violence was a never-ending cycle. They didn't have to accept that fact, so they took it into their own hands. Prison was crazy enough, not very well secured at all, and they knew freedom was in reach. They had seen The Great Escape, so they decided to get serious and plan an outrageous, despicable plan: dig their way to freedom. One night, they hit a sewage pipe. The tunnel filled with muck instantly, and for a moment, it seemed that their plan was doomed to fail. But they were not going to give up. They recruited Benny, another American inmate who had some plumbing experience. Benny was skeptical at first. What were the chances of success? But the temptation of freedom proved too great to resist, and he agreed to help them. United, they fixed the pipe and continued on their way. After months of toil, the tunnel was finally complete. They picked one fateful night when hearts pounded in their chests, inching ever closer to freedom while crawling through the narrow passage. The overpowering scent of earth and sewage filled them, and the darkness was an absolute shroud covering everything. Each sound was amplified in their ears, the scraping of their clothes against the dirt and the relentless thudding of their own hearts. Finally, they found themselves just beyond the prison walls. For a moment they stood there, too stunned to take another step. They had done it. They were free. The air vibrated with tension as they strolled, calmly, confidently, past the guards, feigning the guise of locals. Their hearts ran with every inch they put between themselves and the prison. Each step resonated like a triumph, yet they knew that safety was still a promise far away. They had to move on. They broke into 2 groups and quickly walked away from 7 months of terror, suffering, and near misses with death. Mike, May, and Paul crossed the border, once again returning home with a story that seemed almost too unbelievable to believe. The relief washed over them in waves, yet so too did a profound sense of disbelief. Had they really endured all of that? What do you think? Comment below. I want to know your opinion about this matter. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button, and also don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more of these kinds of videos. Thanks for watching.